Now that the property setters don't call on property changed, we can convert a lot of the properties to auto properties. This isn't a big change, but it will let us replace maybe 10 lines of code with 1 line of code. This reduces the cognitive load. And cognitive load is a term for basically the amount of mental energy or horsepower we need to use to think about something and understand it. And like in all refactoring, we're not changing the behavior of the program, we're just changing kind of the structure of it so it's easier for us to work with and understand. By doing something like this, converting 10 lines to 1, not only does it give us less to read, but it shows us more of the program on the screen at one time. For example, if we look at the current grouped inventory item class, it's 36 lines long. And we have 2 properties with backing variables. So the property, the white space, and the backing variable takes up 10 lines. That means one property is 10 lines out of 36. It also means that if we want to look at this class, we have to scroll up and down. This is a small class, but imagine we had a larger one that was hundreds of lines long, had lots of functions. We might be down in line 100, looking at something in a function, and we have to scroll up to see what happened to a variable somewhere else. And then we have to scroll back down, remember where we were. That just makes things a lot more confusing. So for this lesson, we're going to convert these properties with backing variables, where we can, to auto properties. And as we're doing this, we're also going to fix some permissions on the auto properties. For example, here in game details, you could have title could have a get and set. However, the only time the set gets used is in the constructor. And by having a set, it kind of implies something else is going to change it. If we change the set to a private set, for example, then we know this title property can only get changed by some other function in the class. In this case, there is nothing else in the class that would change it. This is just an example. We could also do a protected set so that we know this can only be changed by this class or one of its children. Or we could do inits, which is a new feature in C#, where the property can only be set at the time of instantiation, kind of like with the constructor, but it's for constructorless instantiating. So let's take a look at the changes we're going to make. We'll start with the game details class, and the first thing we'll do is get rid of the setter on title, subtitle, and version, since the only time those values ever get set are in the constructor. Next, we'll clean up the grouped inventory items. We could manually change this to an auto property, but Visual Studio has a way for us to refactor this. You'll notice if we hover over the item property, we get a message from Visual Studio saying that you can use a property, and we can show potential fixes by pressing Control plus the period. So I'll do that. Select the Use Auto property, and this is the built-in refactoring that Visual Studio has. So now it changed this to an auto property and got rid of the backing variable. We can do the same thing here with the quantity, and we can do it with Control period, or we can also go over here for the quick actions, click on the light bulb, and we have use auto property as an option. So now our class that was 36 lines long and we had to scroll up and down to see is 18 lines long. A little bit easier to work with. Next, we'll clean up the living entity class. And here we're going to make sure that the name is an auto property with no setter. This only gets set at instantiation. Current hit points, it's going to have a private setter because we only want to change it in our functions down here for take damage or heal. Maximum hit points we'll have as protected. This is the living entity class, so both the monster and the players inherit from it, and we want those to be able to modify this. Gold is private because it's only used by our function down here to receive gold or spend gold. Level will be protected. That can be modified by the child classes. And inventory will be an auto property with a private setter because it can only be modified by other functions here in the living entity class. Then we'll modify player attribute. Before, modified value had a backing variable, and now we're just going to make it an auto property. The player attribute modifier class, this used to have setters for the properties, and we'll change these to init, because the only time these get set is when we are instantiating. And we can do a quick reference here. In the game detail service, when we instantiate it, we're also doing the setting of the properties here without a constructor. So this is where the init comes into play. In the quest status, we're going to change is completed to an auto property, and we need to keep the setter here because we actually change the is completed status elsewhere in the program when the player completes a quest. Then we'll go into the view model classes. In the character creation view model, we're going to change the selected race to an auto property with init because this only gets set again when we're instantiating it. We're going to convert the name to init since that gets it set during instantiation only. And we're going to remove the setter we had here on the player attributes because this never gets set. We populated it at instantiation with this empty observable collection, and then we modify that collection. We add things to it or remove things from it. But we never set the player attributes to a new observable collection. And finally, we'll go into game session, and the game details and the current trader properties we're going to change to auto properties. Current trader will have a private setter, and game details will have a private setter because these only get modified by other functions inside game session. And those are all the changes we need to make to the code. Since we change them, we'll do a build clean and then do a rebuild, and we'll be very careful to make sure we didn't get any errors in here. Since we changed some of the visibility, that could cause problems. I think especially sometimes with XAML binding, it doesn't really know that this is actually used somewhere else. So we need to make sure we test the program, test the game again. We'll start a new game. I'm going to change the race to orc, so we should see the strength increase. And it did. Create the player. So here's our inventory, our quests, and our recipes. We'll make a granola bar, and we see our inventory changed. That's still good. We'll move. We see our locations change. We get our messages still. We get our image of the snake. And we'll start to attack him and see if our 10 hit points change. So our hit points are dropping as we fight. And as we fight, our gold increased here from 10 to 11, and our experience points increased from 0 to 5. That's good. Okay, our inventory is increasing, so it looks like everything is still working. And that's going to be it for this lesson. I'm not sure what I'm going to do for the next lesson, but it is probably still going to be cleaning up the model classes so we can eventually move them out into the SOS/CS RPG models project. Right now we still have some dependencies, the model classes doing some actions, calling the services, which we aren't going to be able to do once we move the services into the services project and the models into their model project. We need to make sure that the model classes are what I call bucket of bits classes. They're really just holding properties. If you have any questions, please leave a comment below the video or on the support page, and I will get back to you as soon as possible. Bye.